Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episode's story. There is something wrong with my ex-girlfriend. I'd be lying if I said that breaking up with Harmony felt liberating in any sense of the word. It didn't. It felt like putting a 2-week-old puppy down with a shotgun behind a woodshed, while looking it straight in its adorable little puppy eyes as it asked you, "Why are you doing this to me, Mark?" But breaking up was the best thing to do for both of us. There's no easy way to say this, but Harmony needed therapy, not a boyfriend. Harmony had attachment issues. Dear God, did she have attachment issues? Her mother had died of an overdose when she was a kid, and her dad had been a deadbeat who'd taken off the first chance he'd gotten, so she'd been punted from foster home to foster home like an unwanted hot potato. As a result, when she latched on to someone, she latched on. She used to text me constantly, and if I didn't reply every 10 minutes, she'd confront me about it. Sometimes, those little confrontations would escalate into full-out arguments. And after a while, sometimes became often enough that I stopped bothering with arguing back. See, you can support someone as much as humanly possible, but there's only so much one person can do to prop up another's mental health. No matter how badly I wanted to help her, there was never going to be any way for me to help her work through her literal mountain of personal issues. And my continued failure to do so just poisoned our already toxic relationship even further. And not to sound too salty about everything, but I was pretty sure that on some level, she didn't want to work through those issues. What she wanted was someone to just deal with it for her. And so every few nights, she'd sob and ramble about how everyone in her life had abandoned her, how no one ever truly cared about her, how all she wanted was to be loved. But she never really considered what she could be doing to fix her own problems. She never seemed to stop and think about what she could be doing differently. It was everyone else's fault, never hers. And if only someone would come along and be different, if only someone would come along and fix it all for her, everything would be fine. Some nights, I was that guy. Some nights, I was just another asshole who was inevitably going to abandon her too. Still, I tried to prove her wrong. God, did I ever try? But she'd already decided that I was going to leave her right after we started dating, and while it took 3 years, that self-fulfilling prophecy ultimately came true. I couldn't deal with her anymore. The constant emotional meltdowns, the constant need for validation, and constant shifts in her mood. 1 minute, she could be fine and cuddly and everything would be great. Then I'd say the wrong thing, mention a TV show or a comic she didn't like, spend too much time with a friend who wasn't her, and then she'd go off on me. I couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't deal with getting yelled at for not spending enough time with her because I was the only one in the house with a regular job, since she refused to go out and get one herself. I couldn't deal with her anymore, so I ended it. At first she cried, bawling her eyes out. Then she got angry, screaming at me, throwing things at me, calling me every single derogatory name in the book. And then, after I'd left to sleep on a friend's couch, came the apologies. She begged for another chance. She begged for me to come back. She sent me nudes, trying to lure me back with the promise of sex. Then the cycle started again, until the length between the messages she sent slowly got longer and longer and longer as she began to accept the reality that we were finally over. Like I said, I hated doing it to her. It felt like drowning my best friend, watching her struggle and fight to save a relationship that I knew had to end. I realized that to an outsider, she probably does sound legitimately insane. Most people would probably wonder why I even dealt with her for so long. But our relationship wasn't all bad. We had some good times too. The thing is, with relationships like this, it's hard to just accept all of the problems. You make excuses, you downplay them, you focus on the good, and every time you get yelled at for being the bad guy, you just take it, because even if you know it's all bullshit, on some level, you don't want to invalidate the other person's feelings, because that's what all those bad people who left them did. and you don't want it to be one of them. You're supposed to be different. You need to be different. You know they've got problems, but you don't want to admit it. You don't want to abandon them like everyone else. You want to be the one who stays with them until the end. In every sense, it's a hell of your own creation. In between the arguments and the emotional instability, Harmony could be sweet, she could be sincere, she could be full of passion. She'd be a good listener when I needed to vent. She was genuinely funny. And she loved me. She loved me so much that I knew she felt it in every bone in her body. She loved me, and I loved her back. I wanted to help her. I wanted to help fix her messed up life. I wanted to be her other half. I really, truly did. I just couldn't, and accepting that was the best thing I could have done for either of us. Maybe it was a mistake, but I did stay in touch with Harmony after the breakup. More accurately, she stayed in touch with me. And when she finally accepted that she and I were through, then I started responding to her. Mostly, we'd talk about old TV shows we both used to enjoy together. And sometimes she'd give me updates on how she was finally getting her shit together. I suspect she mostly did that to try and gauge how interested I'd be in getting back together, and I'd be lying if I said that I hadn't entertained the thought. I wasn't planning on actually doing it, not anytime soon at least, but I had considered it. Maybe if she was getting the help she needed, the therapy, the medication, the socialization, things would be different. Maybe. Either way, it was still nice to see her finally starting to take care of herself. Not only had she started therapy, but she'd also taken up hiking to help her get out of the house. Thanks to the hiking, she'd put on a few pounds of muscle since the breakup. She'd always been scrawny, thanks in no small part to a history of eating disorders. But now she looked good. If you'd shown me the last selfie she sent to me, back when we'd still been dating, I would have thought it was someone else entirely. Her skin was less pale than it had been. The dark circles under her eyes had started to fade, and her long, messy dark hair looked like it had finally encountered a hairbrush. In the picture, she was standing at the edge of a cliffside, overlooking a dense forest. She had a wide, beaming smile that I'd never seen on her face before, and the message that accompanied the text read, 5kmers, new personal best. The Harmony I'd known would never have taken a 5-kilometer hike. Hell, the Harmony I'd known barely changed out of the tank tops and shorts she slept in, but here she was dressed to be out in public. She'd been working full-time as a graphic designer. She was doing fantastic. Badass, I texted back. Thanks. The hike back was actually a little harder. Wandered off the trail and got a little lost for a bit there. Oh shit, you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm back in my car. Well, at least she was safe. Gotta say it did spook me a little though. At one point, I actually think I heard something moving through the trees. Oh shit, you see what it was? I don't think so. Probably just squirrel or a deer. Didn't get a good look at it. It probably heard me and ran off. At least she seemed upbeat about it, and it really didn't seem like she'd ever been in any real danger. Busy tonight? Want to grab a bite? Her next text didn't really surprise me. She asked to see me every now and then. I usually turned her down. I wasn't entirely ready to go back to seeing her in person again. I still needed my space. Sorry, I've got work. Bill. Another night then? Yeah, I'll let you know. We'd had that little conversation almost 1,000 times before. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did still have some work I needed to finish up that night, but I knew I wasn't really going to be that late. Yeah, it's been so long, I really want to see you again. 3. That message, admittedly, almost made me rethink choosing not to see her again. I kept thinking about the good times we'd had together, the best parts of our relationship, and thinking back on those made it easy to forget just how dysfunctional we'd been. Still, my bigger head prevailed, and I gave her a polite but dismissive reply before moving on with my day. She'd messaged me again the next day, late in the morning, around 10:30. It was a little odd. Up until yesterday, I hadn't been hearing from her as much, although I wasn't that put off by hearing from her again. That said, the message she'd sent was concerning. Hey, you sleep okay last night? She usually didn't send messages like that. It seemed oddly personal. At first, I kind of wondered if maybe she was just trying to endear herself to me or something, but that seemed unlike her. She'd never even sent me messages like that when we'd been dating. Still, I responded, "Yeah, I slept okay. You?" "Not well. Feeling kinda sick, actually." Now I got it. Seemed like she wanted to vent. Well, I didn't really have anything better to do, so I figured why not let her talk? "Something you ate?" "I don't know. It started last night. Head is a bit dizzy, too." "You go to a clinic?" "Gonna try some Tylenol first. See if that helps. Kinda worried, though. Maybe something bit me while I was out yesterday." "Like a bug?" "I took a bad fall on the way back. Didn't think it was that bad. I dunno now." "Go to a walk-in." She took a few moments to reply after I sent that, and I could almost see her staring down at her phone, mulling it over. "You're right. I should suck it up and go." I let her message sit for a few minutes while my attention shifted back to my work before she texted me again. "Can you go with me?" I stared down at my phone before sighing. I wasn't dumb enough not to see right through what she was trying to pull here. "Can't. I'm working. I'm sorry." She just sent me a frowny in response. "Sorry." I said again, and our conversation mostly petered out after that until later in the day. She started texting me again around 2. This time, the message read, "Went to the clinic. Doctor says I'm okay." "That's good to hear," I replied. "Maybe you just need rest?" "Maybe. Go rest and drink water." "I will. I'm meeting someone tonight, though." This wasn't the first time she'd met someone since we'd broken up, although those meetups were few and far between. The fact that she had to tell me about each one told me that she was probably just hoping I'd get jealous, but I genuinely hoped that one of the guys she was going out with would be the one to finally steal her away from me. I wasn't jealous at all. Well, okay, maybe a little, but it was a small, shameful little pang of envy that I quashed the moment it rose up in my chest. She needed someone who wasn't me. I knew that, and I think she knew it too, on some level. "Okay, don't stay out too late." I texted back and left it at that. She replied to me, saying she wouldn't, but I didn't say anything more to her. It was better for both of us if I didn't take her bait. It was time for her to meet someone else. Maybe that would be good for her. Hell, maybe this would really work out for her. Maybe they'd be a better fit than we ever were. Hopefully. Even if it wasn't with me, I still wanted her to be happy. When I woke up the next morning, I had 19 missed calls, 8 voicemails, and about 54 unanswered texts, all from Harmony. Clingy as she used to be, this was a massive red flag. Something was wrong, and that knowledge forced aside the grogginess I still felt after waking up. I sat up in bed and skimmed through the most recent ones. I don't remember last night. I don't see anyone in the house. I think I cut myself. There's blood. I wasn't drinking anything, I just don't remember. I feel sick. Should I go back to the clinic? Mark, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Immediately, that pit of worry in my gut sank even deeper. I didn't even bother checking the voicemails and just called her outright. The phone rang a few times before she finally answered. "Mark?" Her voice was low, raspy almost. She sounded a little out of it. "Harmony, what the hell is going on? I just woke up and I saw your texts. What happened last night?" "Don't remember," she said. "Well, what do you remember? What happened with the guy you were seeing?" "We met at a restaurant." "Mark, can you just come over?" "I don't feel good. Keep throwing up." I said yes without even thinking. "I'll be right over. Just try to drink some water. Stay awake, okay? I'll be right there." I threw on yesterday's jeans and immediately drove over. Harmony's apartment was a little cleaner than the old apartment we'd shared together had been, although given the state of the place, that really wasn't saying much. The place almost looked torn apart, as if there'd been some sort of brawl in there. On the walls, I noticed scuffs and bloody handprints, supporting the idea that there'd been some kind of struggle. But looking at Harmony sitting in the middle of it all, she didn't look as if she'd been part of any kind of struggle. There wasn't a mark on her. She sat on her couch, dressed in a loose-fitting tank top and her favorite comfortable shorts, cupping a mug of hot chocolate. There were dark circles under her eyes that looked a little worse than the ones she'd had when we were together. Her skin seemed paler than it had in her recent pictures, and her hair was a mess, but otherwise, she still looked relatively healthy. She looked over at me when I came in, the exhaustion still clear on her face. "Mark." Her voice was hoarse and raspy. She stood up before pulling me into a tight hug. I don't know what happened. I don't remember last night. I don't. Okay, don't stay out too late. I texted back and left. I could feel her starting to break down, sobbing as I held her close. My eyes shifted toward the bloody handprint on the wall, quietly narrowing. The handprint was too large to be hers. It had to be someone else's, but whose? Harmony looked over at the blood, and I could sense the dread in her. I don't know how that got there, she said softly. I don't know. It's all right, I said, gently stroking her hair. It's all right. I knew that was a lie. I didn't know what the hell had happened to her last night, but I already had my suspicions. Someone else had clearly been here, and there was only one person I could think of. Harmony's mystery date. All of the pieces fell so easily into place. A date she couldn't remember, signs of a struggle in her home, but no sign of the mystery man. It all made too much sense. Whoever she'd gone out with last night must have done something to her. They must have slipped something into her drink, and God, judging by the blood, she must have still been able to fight back. But that didn't change what he'd done, whoever he was. I'm sorry. I don't remember. I don't know what. Her voice sounded raspier than usual. She barely sounded like herself. I couldn't imagine the pain she was in. I didn't know what more I could say to her, so I just held her. I'm sorry. It's all right. You're all right. I've got you. Without even thinking about it, I made her an offer. Let's get your things, okay? You can stay with me for a few days. I've got you. She looked up at me, as if she genuinely hadn't been expecting me to offer that to her. But what else could I have done? Left her all by herself? No, I couldn't have done that, not after what I thought she'd been through. No, I can't. I couldn't. And I can't just leave you here by yourself, okay? Come on. We'll figure this out. We'll talk to the police and we'll find this guy, okay? She was silent for a moment before giving me a slow nod. Okay? I helped her up off the couch and led her to her bedroom, helping her gather up what she'd need for a few days. Then I took her home. The next few hours were a blur. I did take her to file a report with the police. She showed them the profile of the man she'd met the night before. Apparently his name had been Lucas. His profile picture depicted a man with rimless glasses, dark hair, and soft features. He kinda looked a little bit like me, but I chose not to think about that too much. The police took her statement and promised they'd keep us updated. Then we went home. My apartment only had one bedroom, so I washed the sheets and set up the bed so Harmony could sleep on it as I prepared to take the couch. You don't have to, Mark. I'll take the couch, really, she'd protested. But I wasn't going to hear any of that. I insisted she take the bed, and she eventually just accepted that she was going to have to spend the night in a comfortable bed. We ordered takeout for dinner that night. She seemed to be in slightly higher spirits as we ate than she had been throughout the rest of the day, but her smile always faded quickly, and I could see a hollow look in her eyes as her mind wandered back to the things she did not remember. After we ate, we played a game together to try and keep her mind off of things, but it really didn't accomplish much. Her mind was elsewhere. And it wasn't even 9 in the evening before she excused herself to go to bed. I asked her if there was anything else I could do for her. She said there wasn't, so I let her sleep, and I didn't find myself staying up that much longer either. It wasn't the first time I'd dozed off on my couch. It wasn't the most comfortable place to sleep, but it was comfortable enough. I was a little disoriented when I woke up to pee at some point, but I got my bearings pretty quickly. I got up off the couch and headed to the bathroom. It was on my way back that I noticed my bedroom door was open, so I stopped for a moment to look inside to see how she was doing. The bed was empty. I stopped for a moment, thinking that maybe I just didn't see her for some reason, but the sheets were pulled back and the bed was completely empty. Harmony? I called out to her, but there was no response. A draft from the open window caused the curtains to flare out. I paused. My window wasn't usually open. Had Harmony opened it? Harmony? I stepped into the room and looked around. No sign of her. Glancing at the open window again, I felt a sudden spike of panic in my chest as I ran over toward it. She wouldn't have. The screen that had previously covered my window was gone. No. I looked out the window, dreading what I'd see at the bottom, but there was nothing. No sign that Harmony had jumped out. No sign of her anywhere. That was good, right? I left the room, looking around my apartment and half hoping she'd be rummaging through my kitchen or something, but I was alone. She was gone. When I tried to call her phone, I heard it ringing in my bedroom, so clearly she hadn't taken it with her. I figured that was probably a good sign. Maybe she'd gone out on a walk or something. That had to be it, although the fact that she hadn't taken her phone seemed odd to me. Without a whole lot of other options, I couldn't really do much more than sit and wait to see if she came back. So that's exactly what I did. I sat on the couch, waiting for some sign that she was back. I kept waiting for her to walk through my front door, which I couldn't help but notice was still locked. Last I checked, she didn't have a key, but maybe she'd somehow found one? That didn't make sense. None of this made sense. Still, in the end she did come back, just not through the front door. I never actually saw or heard her coming back, but about 2 hours after I'd noticed she was missing, I found her in my bed, fast asleep and wrapped up in my blanket, as if she'd never even been missing. I paused when I saw her, wondering if maybe I'd somehow missed her earlier, but no, the bed had been empty. I knew it'd been empty. Had she climbed back in through the window? That didn't make any goddamn sense. I was living in a 6th-floor apartment. I almost considered waking her up, but as I got closer, I noticed the dark smears on her hands. At first, I thought they were just shadows, but shadows don't leave smears on the sheets. I should have asked her about it. I should have turned on the light and seen for myself. But I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I think I wanted to believe that it really was just shadows, even if I should have known better. Or maybe there was some deeper, other reason I didn't try to confront her right then and there. Maybe on some level, I knew what was wrong already. I didn't have any sort of name for it. I didn't know the finer details, but I knew it was something. And on some level, I knew what might happen to me if I roused her. Instead, I just left my bedroom, tried not to think about everything that had just happened, and sat down on the couch, pretending that I was planning on going back to sleep, as if sleep was something I was even capable of anymore. The hours ticked past, and after a while I heard her waking up. I pretended not to notice as she tore around my bedroom, muttering to herself and swearing under her breath, clearly panicked. I laid down and pretended to be asleep as she stripped my bed and hastily stuffed my sheets into the washing machine as if it would clean off all of the blood. Then I heard her disappear into the bathroom. The shower roared to life, and she stayed in there for the better part of 45 minutes. When she finally came out to check on me, I pretended as if I was just waking up, put on a familiar fake smile and asked if she wanted breakfast. She didn't, but she said yes, just to be polite. As I cooked, she sat anxiously at my kitchen table, glancing down at her hands, which I imagined she'd scrubbed down to the bone during the 45-minute shower she'd taken before coming out to see if I was awake. "I'm sorry about the sheets," she said softly. I thought I had tampons in my purse, but it's fine. Nothing I haven't seen before," I assured her. I couldn't tell if she knew I was lying or not. "I know, it's just embarrassing. I feel really awful about it. I promise I'll clean the whole mess up." I just nodded. If I'd thought for 1 second that it was just period blood, I'd have offered to help. "Did the cramps wake you up at all last night?" I asked. "Huh? Cramps? No, I slept the whole night through," she said, although she sounded unsure, almost as if she wanted to believe that, but didn't. Maybe she didn't know where she'd gone either. I thought about asking her outright, but it didn't feel right to do so. "I'm fine, really," she promised, but neither of us believed that. When I got home from work that evening, she was in my kitchen, in the middle of cooking me a meal that was a hell of a lot nicer than anything I'd eaten in a long while. "Oh, you're home," she said, putting on a big smile the moment she saw me, as if nothing was wrong. "Sorry for the mess. I promise I'll clean it up. It's fine," I said. "What is this, though?" "This? Well, you've been really good to me, letting me stay here and all that. I wanted to say thank you." "Oh, you didn't need to do anything for me. I just wanted to be helpful." "I know, but I wanted to." She was wearing a big, sweet smile that was hard to resist, although it wasn't enough to make me forget about the strange things I'd seen that morning, nor It make me forget about the crime scene that I'd seen just down the street. I'd noticed it on the way to work. I hadn't seen much, but I'd seen the paramedics moving a covered body into an ambulance, and the memory of it had left a pit in my stomach all day. I wanted to pretend otherwise, but somehow I knew it had something to do with Harmony. Just what, I couldn't be sure, but there was a connection there. At her insistence, I sat down at the kitchen table. Usually it was just a magnet for clutter, but Harmony had taken the time to clear it off. Odd. She'd never been the sort to clean anything back when we'd been together. Then again, she'd barely been able to cook craft dinner back then, but judging from what I saw in the kitchen, she was making steak. Here we go. Hope you're hungry. She hummed as she brought out 2 plates, piled high with steak, boiled frozen vegetables, and oven-roasted potatoes. It looks good, I said. Where'd you get the steak? I picked it up, she said. I wanted to do something special for you. She smiled at me, but there was something wrong with that smile. There was something wrong with her. The Harmony I knew had been a mess, and even if she'd been getting her life back together, I'd never have imagined her as being this put together. And in a way, she wasn't. She was wearing a nicer dress than usual, but her hair looked messier and more unkempt than it ever had before. Her smile seemed a little too wide, and the way she moved, she seemed out of it. Her eyes seemed glassy and far away. I would have asked if she was high, but Harmony was never the type to use drugs. No, this felt like it was someone else entirely. Someone other than Harmony. Come on, eat up, she said. I made it just for you. I looked down at the steak before cutting into it. The meat was practically raw, not blue rare. Raw. It looks good, right? She asked. I looked up to see that she'd already devoured half of hers. Oh, wow, you were hungry, I said softly. Yeah, my appetite's been weird ever since that hike the other day. It's funny, there's parts of it I don't remember. I think I ran into someone, but she shook her head and changed the subject. Hey, aren't you gonna eat? I looked down at the steak again before taking a bite of it. There was no seasoning on it, but I forced myself to keep eating. The night you met that guy, Lucas, were you hungry that night too? I asked, swallowing a gory hunk of raw beef. Yeah, really hungry, she said. And last night too, but I didn't want to bother you with it. Right, I replied absent-mindedly. So going back, you said you met someone in the woods, right? Do you remember anything about them? I just told you I didn't, she said. Nothing at all? She seemed to think for a moment. I think I remember that I was bothering him and his friends. I don't remember their names though. She shook her head. Whatever it was, she didn't want to get into it. It doesn't matter. Are you done eating yet? She looked at me, and there was a hunger in her eyes that was both familiar and disturbingly alien. No, not. I'm not hungry, I stammered. Well, we can reheat it, she said, her voice lower and more sultry than before. You know, I really do want to thank you properly, Mark. I've been waiting all day for you to get home. Do you ever miss me? Do you ever miss the way we used to be? She stood up, quietly stalking closer to me like a cat about to pounce. I tried to get up and get away, but she planted herself in my lap. Come on, you have to miss me, she said, her voice low and breathy. I miss you. She kissed me deeply on the lips, and I pushed her off of me, stumbling out of my chair and putting a few feet between us. No, I can't. I don't want to. Liar, she teased. I know you want a piece of this. She tried to get close to me again, but I forced her away. I said no. I saw rage flash through her eyes. What? Why are you looking at me funny? I'm still me, you know. I just feel better. Can't you just be happy that I feel better for once in my life? Because there's something wrong with you, Harmony. I don't know what it is, and I don't even know if you know, but something is fucking wrong. You have to see it. I don't know if it's got something to do with whatever happened in the woods, or if it's something else, but I don't think you're okay, and you're starting to fucking scare me. Scare you, she repeated. What did I ever do to scare you? Everything. How the hell do you not see it? How the hell don't you see just how fucking weird you've been acting? At first I thought it was that guy, Lucas. I thought he did something to you, but no, you did something to him, didn't you? Why the fuck else would your apartment have been like that? Harmony just glared at me, but I could see something in her eyes. a primal animal rage that was nothing like what I'd ever seen in her before. "And last night," I said, "last night you disappeared. You were in my bed, and then you weren't. Where did you go? I don't fucking know. But when you suddenly reappeared, you were covered in blood, and My hands were shaking. My voice caught in my throat. God, why hadn't I said anything last night? Why hadn't I done anything sooner? Logically, it would have made sense to do something sooner, wouldn't it? But was any of this logical? Did any of what was happening even make sense? I couldn't help but wonder if I'd completely lost my mind. But if I was crazy, Harmony would have said something, right? She wouldn't just be glaring at me like that, would she? "I don't know what's wrong with you," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know what it is, but I know you need help." Her head tilted slightly to the side. "Why?" she finally asked. "Right now, I feel better than ever." "Oh, really, yeah? You feel better than ever? Eating raw fucking steak, disappearing at night, and coming home covered in blood? You feel better," I snapped. "Whatever the hell is going on with you, Harmony, it's making you sick in the fucking head." Her lips curled back into an animalistic snarl. She moved toward me, and as her eyes met mine, I saw that there was no trace of the girl I once knew in there. It wore her face, yes, but whatever was coming toward me, whatever I'd been trying to get through to, it wasn't Harmony. She lunged for me, almost like an animal. I grabbed her and pushed her aside before lunging toward the kitchen table and grabbing one of the steak knives. "Get the fuck back," I stammered, although the thing that looked like Harmony didn't listen. It just threw itself toward me again, tackling me to the ground, and on instinct, I drove the steak knife into her stomach. As soon as I heard her pained scream, I felt a deep horror overtake me. I pushed her off and scrambled away, watching her writhe in pain on the ground. She glared at me, her eyes bloodshot and furious. "Mark," she seethed, before violently ripping the knife out of her own stomach. Then, on all fours, she sprinted toward me, moving faster than I had ever seen anyone move. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair to try and slow her down, as I did the only thing I could think to do, and ran. I took off toward the front door of the apartment and threw it open. I heard an animalistic scream behind me that I was sure belonged to Harmony before I raced through the door and slammed it closed behind me. Then, I ran. And I didn't look back. Harmony was gone when I finally went back to the apartment, accompanied by a couple of police officers. The cameras in the hallways and lobby of my building never showed her leaving, but the window in my bedroom was open. I made sure to close it and lock it tight. The cops took my statement and promised to keep a lookout for Harmony, but I haven't heard anything back from them. Apparently, nobody has seen any trace of her ever since that night. She didn't check herself into any hospitals to take care of her stab wound or anything like that. She just dropped off the face of the earth. The cops have made it pretty clear that I shouldn't leave town, but that hasn't stopped me from crashing at a friend's place for the past month or so. I feel better not being alone at night. I don't have any answers about what exactly happened to Harmony. All I know is that she went into the woods for a hike one day, and she came out different. I don't even think she knows what happened to her. What I do know is that the girl I used to know, the girl I used to love, she's gone for good. And I don't know what now exists in her place. I just know that it's out there. A friend of mine sent me something the other day. A different friend than the one I'm staying with. He wasn't in the loop on what happened, although I've filled him in on a few of the less insane details since then. It was a screenshot from a dating app he was on. The girl in the picture looks a lot like Harmony, and her name is listed as Harmony. But Harmony never looked so pale or gaunt. Her eyes never looked so sunken and predatory. It still has her face, but it isn't Harmony. Not anymore. While they survived, others weren't as fortunate in what happened next. Whatever you do, don't answer the phone at 3 a.m. I don't usually have nightmares. At least I didn't used to. But after last night, I'm not sure I'll ever sleep peacefully again. It started with the phone call. Late, around 3 a.m., I was already half asleep, the room dark except for the dim glow of my bedside clock. The phone rang and I groggily reached for it, annoyed at whoever would be calling at this hour. When I picked it up, there was no sound, just silence. "Hello?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. Nothing. Who is this? I asked, now more awake, a creeping unease starting to form in my stomach. Still silence. I was about to hang up when I heard it. A faint, crackling sound, like someone trying to breathe through a bad connection. Then, barely audible, a voice whispered, "I'm inside." My blood ran cold. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard it right. But then the voice came again, clearer this time. "I'm inside." I bolted upright, heart pounding, and looked around the room. The door was shut, just as I had left it before going to bed. The windows were locked. Everything seemed normal, but that voice, it was so close, like someone whispering right in my ear. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark, straining to hear any sound in the house. Nothing. No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, just silence. But that didn't stop the feeling that someone was watching me. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, an old baseball bat from my closet, and slowly opened my bedroom door, peeking out into the hallway. The house was pitch black, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the curtains in the living room. I stepped out, gripping the bat tightly, and crept down the hall, my heart racing with every step. The silence was suffocating, making every tiny noise sound amplified. The creak of the floor under my feet, the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I reached the living room, where everything seemed exactly as I'd left it. No sign of anyone, no open doors or windows. I let out a shaky breath, starting to feel a little ridiculous. Maybe it was a prank call, or my mind playing tricks on me. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the window, just behind me, was the outline of a figure. Tall, with long limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. My blood froze as I watched it, unmoving, standing right behind me. Slowly I turned around. There was no one there, but the reflection didn't change. The figure in the window was still there, standing right where I had been looking. Its head was cocked to one side, as if curious. And then it moved. Not in the reflection, but in reality. A sudden, jerking movement that sent the blood in my veins to ice. I swung the bat at the empty air behind me, expecting to hit something, but the bat just cut through nothing. Yet, when I looked back at the window, the figure was still there, now closer. Its head tilting further, its eyes, hollow and dark, fixed on me. Panic surged through me. I ran, stumbling back to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, breathing heavily, pressing my ear to the wood, trying to hear if it had followed. At first there was silence, but then, from the other side of the door, I heard it again, a whisper. "I'm inside." This time it wasn't coming from the phone, it was coming from just outside the door. I backed away, heart racing, staring at the door as it slowly creaked open on its own. The hallway was empty, but I knew it was there, waiting, just beyond the reach of the light spilling out from my room. Then, in the darkness, I saw them. A pair of hollow eyes staring at me from the blackness. The figure slowly stepped forward, into the light, its twisted limbs moving in that same jerking motion I'd seen before. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure stood at the threshold, its face inches from mine. Its voice was a rasp like wind through dead leaves. "You can't leave," it whispered. "I'm already inside." And then, everything went black. When I woke up, it was morning. The door to my room was still closed, locked just as I'd left it. The house was quiet, sunlight streaming through the windows, but I know what I saw, what I heard. I can still feel its presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting for nightfall. And I know that the next time I hear it whisper, I won't be able to wake up. But that was just the beginning, because the next house had an even darker secret. Complete madness. 2 weeks ago, I visited my grandparents who live in the mountains. Their home is absolutely beautiful. It's a 2-story house with 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a charming balcony. My grandfather built it himself, which makes it even more special. When I knocked on the door, my grandmother opened it. "Oh, my sweet patootie," she exclaimed. I hugged her and laughed. "Grandma, stop calling me that. I'm 26 years old now." She smiled and said, "Nonsense. You'll always be my sweet patootie." "Where's Grandpa?" I asked. "He's in his shed, dear," she replied. I walked out the back door into the backyard. The shed was a bit of a walk, since my grandparents have 2 acres of land. Grandpa spaced out his shed from the house because Grandma doesn't like him smoking near the house. I knocked on the shed door and then walked in. Sure enough, Grandfather was sitting in his chair, smoking a cigar. "Grandma's going to kill you if she catches you with that thing, you know?" I said, pulling up a chair beside him. "Hey, Claire," he greeted me, giving me a side hug. "How have you been?" he asked. "I've been doing well lately. How are you and Grandma?" I replied. "Oh, we're getting by. Reaching those old ages, dear. Our backs ache, our joints creak, everything hurts now," he said with a chuckle. Each laugh sent a cloud of smoke escaping his lips. "You'll see when you get there," he added. "Is John treating you all right?" my grandfather asked. "Yes, sir. He actually proposed to me a few months ago," I said. "Did he?" Grandfather said with happiness, and I simply nodded my head yes. "I'm so happy for you, dear. Congratulations. So, does that mean I'll be a great-grandfather soon?" he said. "You're already a great-grandfather," I responded with a smile, placing my hand gently on his shoulder. "I would like to know, though, if it's possible for you to draft a blueprint for our house. John and I want to build our own, just like you and Grandma did," I said. "I suppose I can," he replied, taking a thoughtful drag from his cigar. "Thanks, Grandpa," I said. "I just really want to create something of our own, you know? To be able to say, this is ours. I bet it feels wonderful." "Yes, it does," my grandfather replied. "What compelled you to leave your hometown in France, move to Maryland, and build your own home to start a family? Did you also desire something for yourself?" I inquired. My grandfather's face fell slightly as he took another pull from his cigar. "Honestly, it's about time I talked about it. I probably won't have much time left to speak on it," he said. I furrowed my brow in confusion. "What do you mean?" I asked. He took a long drag from his cigar and said, "I didn't choose to move away. I had no other choice." "I still don't understand, Grandpa," I said. "Listen, I'm about to tell you something that defies all logic, so I want you to listen carefully and try to understand me. To this day, I have no idea what happened. All I know is that I had to get out of that town before whatever was taking over it claimed me," he said. I was genuinely starting to feel a bit apprehensive. "Are you on any new medication?" I asked. He shook his head and took a long pull from his cigar, releasing a thick cloud of smoke. "I loved where I used to live. My old town was beautiful and tranquil. Everyone knew each other. Life was simple. The streets were lined with flowers and fruit trees, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air while the scent of freshly baked sweets tantalized your senses," he said with a wistful smile. He closed his eyes as if reminiscing transported him back in time. "Sounds lovely," I said. "It was, until the day everything began to change," he replied, taking another puff of his cigar. "It started very subtly, but one by one, people began to lose their minds. At first, it was very minor things, like people muttering to themselves or staring off into the distance, standing there blankly. But soon, it escalated into far more disturbing behaviors. Mrs. Thompson was a sweet old lady, a baker who owned her own bakery in town. One night, she was found wandering the streets, screaming for help. She claimed that the thing was going to get her. The police detained her, took her in, and we never saw her again. Mr. Jenkins, the town's grocer, began collecting dead birds and hanging them around his yard as some sort of grotesque decorations. The madness spread like wildfire. Some people would laugh continuously for hours, while others would scream until they tore their vocal cords. Even then, they still tried to scream. The sound of their screams with torn vocal cords will forever haunt me. It was a harrowing cacophony of wailing, almost inhuman cries. Raspy, guttural noises filled with an unbearable pain and desperation. He paused, taking a slow, deliberate pull from his cigar before speaking again, this time in a quieter, more reflective tone. Some would cry hysterically, and I must admit, I couldn't help but cry too at times. This was my beloved town, and in the blink of an eye, it was all destroyed by what? We still don't know. It was as if the very air carried an infectious disease that deteriorated the brain. He took a long pause and puffed his cigar again. I sat in silence, absorbing the gravity of his words. The worst part was, they began taking their own lives. At first it was just a few, but then it became a daily occurrence. Every time I stepped outside, I feared for my life as I stumbled over the bodies of those who had tragically succumbed to their dramatic fate. I recall vividly the myriad of doctors and scientists, all clad in protective suits, who were resolute in their quest to unravel the mystery of what was transpiring. It seemed they were more preoccupied with the prestige of discovering the cause than with genuinely aiding the afflicted. Despite the countless tests and exhaustive studies they conducted, they remained baffled, unable to discern the nature of the affliction, let alone devise a cure. They began referring to it as the new plague, a term that only served to amplify the collective hysteria. I endeavored to remain steadfast, to be a pillar of strength for my town. Yet, as the days passed, an insidious fear took root within me. I found myself unable to sleep, unable to eat, paralyzed by the terror that I would be the next to fall victim. The day I discovered my best friend John lying lifeless in his home, I realized I couldn't remain any longer. It shattered my heart to leave, to abandon the place that held a lifetime of memories. But I had no other option, my grandfather said, drawing deeply from his cigar. I gathered my belongings and fled to the mountains, desperately hoping to escape whatever malevolent force was consuming our town. As I glanced back one final time, I saw the once vibrant community reduced to a ghostly shadow of its former self. The laughter and joy had been replaced by chaos and sorrow. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I knew I had to save myself. In hindsight, it was the best choice I ever made, he said. I met your grandmother, got married, had your father, and now I have you. None of that would have been possible if I had stayed in that town, my grandfather said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and gratitude. I was almost on the verge of tears, overwhelmed by the unimaginable horrors my grandfather had endured. I stood up and embraced him, expressing how much I loved him. I ended up staying for a week with my grandparents before returning home. I now hold an even deeper respect for my grandfather. I can't fathom enduring what he described. It's even more frightening to think that we still don't know what it was that consumed his old town, or if it's still lurking out there, waiting to infect a new group of people. And while they escaped, others weren't so lucky. The spreading rot of West Hollow Correctional Facility. Jack sat slouched in the chair across from me, his shoulders hunched, eyes constantly flicking toward the camera mounted in the corner. His fingers, pale and trembling, kept tugging at the frayed cuffs of his prison jumpsuit. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, worn down by something much deeper than exhaustion. It was fear, and something else. I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm and controlled. You said it started with a crack? Jack nodded slowly, barely meeting my gaze. Yeah, he mumbled. Just a crack in the wall. That's how it all began. He paused, running a hand through his hair, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to say anything else. Then he took a shaky breath, his eyes distant, like he was trying to relive those first few days in his mind. Solitary's always been a mess, he continued, voice hoarse. The walls in there, cracked, dirty. You get used to it. It's like the whole place is rotting from the inside out. You stop noticing after a while. Mold in the corners, cracks everywhere. Normal stuff for a place like that. His fingers drummed absently on the table, the sound sharp in the otherwise quiet room. I noticed the crack in my cell a few days before everything started. It was small, maybe 3 or 4 inches, right down by the corner where the wall meets the floor. Nothing unusual, right? These walls were falling apart all over the place, so I didn't pay much attention at first. He looked up, his brow furrowed as if trying to decide how to explain what happened next. But the next day, it wasn't just a crack anymore. There was something growing out of it, black stuff. I thought it was mold. That's what you'd think, right? This place isn't exactly sanitary. Jack took a deep breath, his fingers tapping faster now, more erratic. It didn't move, at least not that I could see, but every time I looked at it, it seemed like there was more of it. I swear to God it was spreading. Slow, maybe 6 inches a day. I couldn't see it move, but when I'd wake up in the morning, it had crept further along the wall like it was crawling while I was sleeping. I wrote down the details and looked back up. You're saying it was growing that fast, just overnight? Jack nodded, his voice growing more agitated. Yeah, I'd wake up and there'd be more of it. Not much at first, just a few more inches, but I could tell it was moving. The crack was getting wider too. And it wasn't just mold. I knew it wasn't mold, not with the way it looked. It wasn't just sitting there on the surface, it was alive. His voice grew quieter, as though he wasn't sure if he should be saying the words out loud. It was like it was breathing. I raised my eyebrow but kept my expression neutral. What made you think that? Jack shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the walls of the room before fixing on the table. It wasn't just that it was spreading, it was how it made the room feel. Different, like the air was heavier. It smelled wrong too, not like the usual mold or dampness. This was something else. It smelled like something rotting, foul, the kind of smell that makes you gag. He paused, rubbing his fingers against his temples, trying to recall every detail. I told the guards the second day, right when I noticed it had spread. The guy dropping off food just shrugged it off, said he'd file a report, but I knew he wouldn't. Why would he? It's solitary. They don't care what happens in there as long as we stay quiet. Jack's fingers clenched into fists, knuckles turning white. So I waited, figured maybe someone would check it out, but no one came. And each morning when I woke up, the black stuff had spread a little more. Not fast enough to notice while it was happening, but enough that I knew it was growing. His voice lowered, his eyes widening slightly as he recounted those days. By the third day, it had covered the entire corner of the wall. The crack had gotten bigger, and the black stuff, it wasn't just growing anymore. It was feeding. It had to be. There was no other explanation for how it was spreading so steadily. Every morning, it was a few inches closer, and the smell kept getting worse. He ran his hands through his hair again, his face etched with frustration and fear. I kept telling the guards. Every time they walked by, I'd bang on the door and shout that something was wrong. They thought I was losing it and told me to shut up and deal with it. But I wasn't crazy. That stuff was real, and it was spreading. Jack took a deep breath, his voice dropping almost to a whisper. I wasn't imagining it. I know what I saw. The room felt heavier, his words sinking in like stones. He paused, waiting for my response, but I let the silence stretch, giving him time to collect himself. Finally, I asked, "What happened after the third day? Did it stop?" Jack shook his head, his voice wavering. No, it didn't stop. It just kept growing, slow but steady. Jack took another shaky breath, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. He looked around the room again, like he was searching for something that wasn't there, then rubbed his face with both hands. I could tell he was trying to push back the memories, but they kept clawing their way to the surface. It kept spreading, he muttered, his voice strained. Every morning I'd wake up, and that black stuff was a little closer. 6 inches, maybe more, every damn day. The crack, too. It was getting bigger, like something was trying to push its way out from behind the wall. He stopped, staring at the ceiling for a moment, then shook his head. I couldn't take it anymore. I started banging on the door, yelling at the guards every time they passed. I told them the black stuff was spreading and that the crack was getting worse. They didn't believe me. They just looked at me like I was crazy. His hands clenched into fists. I wasn't crazy. I knew what I saw. But to them, I was just another inmate trying to get out of solitary. They told me to calm down and that someone would come check it out, but no one ever did. Not for days. Jack's voice dropped lower. By the 4th day, I could barely breathe in there. The smell, it was like something had died in the walls. Worse than that, it was foul, like the whole room was rotting from the inside out. He stared down at his hands, and I could feel it. In my bones, you know? Like something was wrong with the air itself. It felt thick and heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I couldn't sleep anymore. I'd lie awake at night, staring at that black stuff creeping along the wall, knowing it was getting closer. Jack paused, shaking his head again, like he was trying to clear the memory. I begged them. Every time a guard walked by, I begged them to move me, to get me out of that cell. They ignored me. Days passed. The black stuff kept growing. I could feel it getting closer, but they didn't care. He let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. It wasn't until the lawsuit threats started flying that they decided to move me. They couldn't risk me going to a lawyer saying they were keeping me in a contaminated cell, so they moved me. I watched him carefully. Where did they take you? To another cell in solitary, Jack muttered. A dirtier one, if you can believe that. No black stuff, though. But I could still see my old cell from the window in my door, just a few doors down. I'd look at it every day, but I couldn't see the fungus. Not yet." His voice dropped, barely a whisper now. I wasn't the only one in solitary anymore. They put someone else in my old cell. Jack stared at the table, his face tight with anxiety. At first, I didn't hear much about him. The guards didn't talk to me after I was moved. But after a few days, I started to overhear things, little bits and pieces. They said the guy they put in my old cell, he'd touched the black stuff. They had to move him to the med wing. He stopped, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them. I didn't know what had happened to him at first, just that he was unconscious, and they didn't think he'd wake up. Then the rumors started. Jack's eyes darkened, his voice lowering. They said his skin was changing. One of the guards said it looked like it was blistering, like something was eating him from the inside out. Another said his veins were turning black, like the stuff was crawling under his skin. I scribbled down notes, glancing up at Jack. "How long after they moved you did this happen?" He shrugged, his voice distant. "A couple of days, maybe. Not long. Whatever was in that cell, it got him fast." Jack's hand shook slightly as he continued. "I started hearing more after that. The guards didn't want to talk about it, but I could tell they were scared. They were trying to keep it quiet, but everyone knew something was wrong. The guy they put in my old cell, he wasn't just sick, he was changing." Jack shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as if the memory of what came next still gnawed at him. It wasn't long after that when things started changing. I could feel it. Something was happening in that place. The guards, they stopped talking. Just did their rounds without saying a word. No more gossip, no more jokes, nothing. He paused, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. The guy in the med wing, they said he wasn't getting better. They'd quarantined him and locked the whole wing down. That's when they started wearing those suits. You know, the ones they wear when there's a biohazard. Full suits, gloves, masks. I couldn't even see their faces anymore. Jack's voice grew more agitated. When they came to drop off my meals, they wouldn't look at me. Just shoved the tray through the slot and walked away. I tried asking them what was going on, but they didn't answer. They didn't say a damn thing. It was like I didn't exist anymore. I watched him carefully, jotting down notes as he spoke. "Did you see anything unusual from your cell during this time?" Jack nodded slowly, his eyes flicking up toward the small window in the door. "Yeah, I started watching my old cell more closely. I couldn't see the black stuff at first, not from where I was. But after a few days, I saw it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The fungus. It was spreading, creeping along the walls of my old cell. I could see it through the window. It had covered almost the whole corner by then, and the crack, it was bigger, a lot bigger. I couldn't see it move, but every day it was a little further along, a little darker, like it was eating away at the walls." Jack swallowed hard, rubbing his hands together again. "And the smell? Even from where I was, I could smell it. Like rot, like something festering. It made my stomach turn every time I caught a whiff of it." He shook his head slowly, his voice growing more desperate. I kept banging on the door, shouting at the guards, asking what the hell was going on. They wouldn't tell me anything, just dropped off the meals and left. No one spoke to me anymore. It was like the whole place had gone silent. Jack's eyes met mine, wide with fear. That's when I knew. Whatever was happening in that prison, it wasn't just some sickness. It was something else, something worse. Jack's voice wavered as he continued, the fear evident in every word. A couple more days passed, and that's when the real shit hit the fan. They stopped delivering meals on time. One day, nothing. No food, no guards, just silence. And I knew something had happened. I could feel it in the air. He rubbed his arms as if trying to shake off a chill. I kept looking out my window, trying to see anything, but the hall was empty. No one came by, no sounds, nothing. It was like I'd been forgotten. Jack paused, his voice trembling slightly. And then I heard the screaming. His eyes grew wide as he relived the moment. It wasn't loud. Solitary's far enough from the main wings that you don't hear much. But I heard it, faint, like it was coming from down the hall, near the med wing. Someone was shouting, panicked like they were fighting something. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. Jack's breath hitched, and he gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. That's when I saw them. The guards. They were running, I've never seen them run before, not like that. They were trying to get out of the med wing, but something was wrong. One of them looked terrified, and I could hear them shouting at each other. Then, silence. He stared at the table, eyes wide and unblinking. That's when I heard the footsteps. Jack's breath quickened as he continued. They were heavy, dragging, like something was limping down the hall. I rushed to the window, trying to see what it was, but the hall was still empty. The sound grew louder and closer, and I swear it was coming from the direction of the med wing. Whatever was making those footsteps, it wasn't walking like a person. He paused, his fingers gripping the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. I heard the guards again. They were shouting something about getting the doors open. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew they were scared, and that scared me. Jack looked up at me, his eyes wide with fear. I saw one of them, a guard, running down the hall. He was heading toward my cell, fumbling with the keys, trying to unlock the door. He kept looking back like something was chasing him. He swallowed hard, his voice shaking. I didn't see it at first, but I heard it. This wet, squelching sound, like something dragging across the floor. And then I saw it, the thing they'd put in the med wing. It wasn't human anymore. It was changed. Jack's hands shook as he spoke, and I could see the fear in his eyes, the memory of that moment burning like a fresh wound. I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at it. The thing, it wasn't human anymore. I don't even know if it remembered being human. His voice cracked, his breath uneven. It was big, taller than I remembered, the prisoner being like it had been stretched somehow. Its skin, if you could even call it that anymore, was swollen, bulging in places like it was filled with something. The black fungus had grown over most of its body, but it wasn't just on the surface. You could see it moving underneath, crawling through its veins, thick and dark. Its skin was splitting in places, oozing this thick, black liquid. Parts of it looked like they were rotting, but it was still alive. Jack leaned forward, his voice dropping as he described the creature in horrifying detail. The worst part was its face. The fungus had taken over most of it, but I could still see parts of what used to be a man. His mouth was hanging open, slack like it had forgotten how to close. His eyes... God, his eyes. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the whole thing, like they'd been swallowed by the darkness inside him. Jack's hands gripped the table, his knuckles white. It wasn't just the way it looked. It moved wrong, too. Like its bones had been broken and put back together in the wrong order. Its arms were too long, its legs bent in ways that didn't make sense. It didn't walk so much as lurch, dragging one foot behind the other. Every step it took made this wet, squelching sound like the fungus was eating away at it from the inside out. He paused, staring at the floor, his voice growing weaker. It smelled, too. Like rot, like meat left out too long. The air around it was thick with the stench, and I could barely breathe. I don't know how the guard could stand being that close. Jack swallowed hard, eyes wide. He almost had the door open. I was right there, watching through the window, and I could see him fumbling with the keys, trying to get the lock undone. His hands were shaking so bad, I thought he'd dropped the keys. His voice trembled as he continued. He was muttering to himself, saying something about needing to get me out. I don't even think he saw the thing coming for him until it was too late. Jack squeezed his eyes shut as if trying to block out the memory. The door clicked open. He finally got it. I thought for a second I was going to make it, but that thing, it was right behind him. It grabbed him before he even had a chance to run. Jack's voice faltered, barely above a whisper. I've never seen anything like it. The way it grabbed him, like it didn't even care. It just tore into him. Its hands, if you can even call them that, were these twisted claws, black and dripping with whatever the fungus had turned it into. It sank them into his chest like they were cutting through butter. He shook his head, eyes distant. He didn't scream, not even once. 1 second, he was there, and the next, he wasn't. Just blood, everywhere. The thing was ripping him apart, tearing chunks out of him like it was feeding, and I just stood there, watching, too scared to move. Jack took a deep breath, his voice still shaking. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like forever. But after it was done, it didn't even look at me. It just turned and started dragging his body down the hall, like it didn't have any purpose, like it was just following some mindless instinct. His hands were still trembling. Jack lifted his head slightly, and his voice was growing faint. And then, it left. Jack's breathing was shaky as he continued, his hands still trembling slightly from the memory. I thought it was over. I thought once it killed the guard, I'd be next. But it didn't even look at me. It just dragged the body down the hall. His voice wavered, growing more desperate as he relived the moment. The fungus, it had spread. I hadn't noticed it before, not like that. I could see it now, seeping out from under the door of my old cell, black tendrils creeping into the hallway. It had gotten bigger, much bigger. Thick, dark strands covered the walls near the cell, growing into the cracks, spreading further and faster than I'd ever seen. Jack swallowed hard, his voice shaking. The thing. It dragged the guard's body right up to the spot where the fungus was leaking out into the hall. I thought maybe it was going to leave him there, but no. It did something worse. He looked down at the table as if ashamed of what he'd seen. It shoved the guard's body into the fungus. Just pushed him right into it like the wall wasn't even there anymore. The black stuff, those tendrils, they wrapped around him, pulling him deeper like it was absorbing him. Jack's voice grew quieter, his fear palpable. I could see it. The fungus spread over the guard's body, crawling over his skin and covering him like a web. His face, what was left of it, disappeared into the black mass, and then the wall. The wall seemed to eat him. It pulled him in until all I could see was this black mound stuck to the wall like it was holding him there. He stared at the floor, eyes wide. It was like the fungus had claimed him, like it was feeding off of him. The more it wrapped around him, the bigger it got, spreading faster now, reaching further along the hallway. Jack paused, his breath catching in his throat. And then the thing that killed him, it started eating. His voice faltered, his eyes wide with terror. It crouched down right by the spot where the fungus was growing the thickest. And then it started tearing chunks of it off, big, wet chunks of black mold, and shoving it into its mouth. It was like it was starving for it, like it needed the fungus to survive. Jack's body shook, his hands clenching into fists. I couldn't watch. It was eating the fungus like it was meat, like it was devouring something alive. And the more it ate, the more the fungus seemed to spread. I could see the walls pulsing, like they were alive, like the whole damn place was breathing. He looked up at me, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was still the prisoner or something else entirely. But whatever it wasn't human anymore. It was part of the fungus, part of whatever was growing inside the walls. Jack's breath hitched, his eyes wide. I was too scared to move. I just watched as it fed. Jack's voice was quieter now, but there was a tension in every word. I don't know how long I stood there, watching it eat. I was too scared to move, too scared to breathe. I thought if I made a sound, it would turn around, and I'd be next. He swallowed hard, staring at the table as if seeing that moment again. But eventually, it stopped. The thing just stood up, slow, like it had all the time in the world. I thought for sure it would notice me then, but it didn't. It just turned, shuffling down the hall back toward the med wing. The fungus was still spreading behind it, creeping further down the walls. Jack took a shaky breath, his hands clenching and unclenching as he continued. That was my chance. The door was unlocked. I didn't want to go out there, but I knew I couldn't stay in the cell. Not with that thing out there. Not with the fungus spreading. He paused, his eyes wide, still rattled by the memory. So I opened the door. As quietly as I could, I slipped out into the hallway. The place smelled worse than ever. Like the air itself was rotting. The walls, they were breathing, pulsing with the black fungus. It had spread further since the last time I looked, covering the doors, the cracks, creeping along the floor. His voice wavered, fear threading through his words. I didn't know where to go. The hall was empty. No guards, no prisoners, just me. I thought about heading back to the main wings, but I didn't know if anyone else was still alive. I didn't know if the fungus had spread to the rest of the prison. Jack rubbed his temples, trying to push back the panic that still clung to his voice. The sound, I couldn't get it out of my head. The walls were making this wet, squelching noise. Every time the fungus pulsed, it sounded like something living was inside the walls, moving with it, like the prison itself was infected. He looked up at me, eyes wide with fear. I kept moving, but it was slow. I was terrified of making too much noise. I didn't know if that thing was still out there, and I wasn't going to take any chances. I stuck close to the walls, avoiding the patches of black mold that were creeping up from the cracks in the floor. The whole place felt wrong. It felt alive. His hands trembled as he spoke, the fear in his voice growing. I made my way through the hallway, past the other cells. Some of them were still locked. I could hear things inside, but I didn't stop to listen. I couldn't afford to. I just kept going, trying to get as far away from that thing as I could. Jack swallowed hard. I don't know how long I walked before I reached the door to the main wing. I thought maybe I'd find someone, another guard, maybe. At the door, it was locked. No way out. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes darting to the camera in the corner of the room. I was trapped. He rubbed his hands over his face, his voice trembling. That's when I heard it. The creature, the thing that killed the guard. It was coming back. I could hear its footsteps, that slow, wet shuffle, dragging something along the floor. I knew it was coming for me this time. His hands clenched the edge of the table. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I looked around, trying to find somewhere to hide, but there was nothing. The fungus was everywhere, crawling along the floor, the walls. I could hear it pulsing. I thought I could feel it inside my head, beating like a second heartbeat. Jack swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a whisper. And then I saw it, an air vent just above the door. It was small, barely big enough for me to squeeze through, but it was my only option. I climbed up, using the edge of the door for leverage, and pulled the grate off the vent. It wasn't quiet, but the creature, it didn't seem to care. It just kept coming. He took a shaky breath. I shoved myself inside the vent, trying not to make too much noise. I could hear it below me, dragging itself closer. I could feel the heat from its body, the smell of rot filling the air. I didn't dare look down. I just kept crawling, inch by inch, through that narrow space, praying it wouldn't hear me. Jack rubbed his hands together, the tension clear in his body. I don't know how long I crawled through those vents. It felt like forever. I could hear the fungus growing inside the walls, like it was alive, spreading through the ducts. But eventually, I found another opening. He looked up, his eyes wide. I didn't know where I was anymore. The prison was like a maze, but I knew I had to get out. I climbed out of the vent and dropped down into another hallway. This one was quieter and cleaner. I could hear voices in the distance. Someone was talking. It wasn't a guard. It sounded official. Jack's fingers trembled slightly. That's when I saw them. Federal agents. They were wearing protective suits, walking through the hallway and talking into radios. I tried to call out to them, but my voice was barely a whisper. I was weak, starving, and my body felt like it was shutting down. He rubbed his face, his voice quieter now. One of them saw me. They turned and pointed, and the others came running. They grabbed me, lifted me up, and I blacked out after that. When I woke up, I was here. The room was quiet for a moment as Jack finished his story. He stared down at his hands, pale and trembling, the words hanging in the air like a thick fog. I watched him carefully, my mind turning over the details of what he'd said. The transformed prisoner, the fungus, the guards, it all lined up with the reports, but something felt off. I glanced at my notes, then back at Jack. You said the fungus was in the walls, that it was everywhere. Do you think it spread beyond the prison? Jack hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly. I don't know. It was moving fast. If it's still there, it's probably spread even further by now. I tapped my pen against the table, considering my next question. What about you? Did you come into contact with the fungus? Jack's eyes flickered toward the camera in the corner of the room, his expression tightening. No, he said quickly. I stayed away from it. I made sure. I watched him closely, noting the tension in his voice. You're sure? No spores? No mold on your skin? Jack's hands clenched into fists, his voice dropping. I said I didn't touch it. But something was wrong. I could see it now, in the way he moved, the way his skin looked under the harsh fluorescent light. There were small, barely noticeable black spots on his hands, like tiny cracks forming just beneath the surface. His fingernails were chipped and discolored. and there was a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead. I leaned forward slightly. "Jack, are you feeling all right?" He didn't answer at first. He stared down at his hands, his breath growing shallow. His fingers twitched again, and then I saw it, just the slightest movement. The skin on his knuckles shifted, bulging for a moment, like something was crawling underneath. Jack's eyes widened, his breath quickening. No, this isn't happening. I didn't touch it." But the evidence was clear now. His skin was changing, dark veins spreading slowly under the surface. The fungus had gotten to him. I could see the horror in his eyes as the realization hit him. He backed away from the table, his voice trembling. "You've got to help me. I can feel it. Under my skin. It's spreading." I stood up, reaching for the door, but Jack grabbed my arm, his grip weak but desperate. "Please, don't let it take me. Don't let me turn into one of them." I pulled away, calling for the other agents. The door swung open, and they rushed in, their eyes wide as they saw the black veins creeping up Jack's arms. He collapsed to the floor, shaking, his breath ragged. "It's too late," he whispered. "It's already inside me." And then, as the agents restrained him, I saw the first crack in his skin. The black tendrils were already spreading. After Jack was restrained and taken away, I sat there in silence, my mind racing. His story was almost too terrifying to believe, but the black veins spreading under his skin told me that something far worse than we could have imagined had happened in that prison. The medical team rushed Jack out of the room, and I made my way to the surveillance office. The tapes from the prison security cameras had been pulled, but I knew where I needed to start. The med bay. Jack had mentioned the prisoner who had been quarantined there, the one who had touched the fungus. If I was going to understand what we were dealing with, I needed to see what had happened to him. I sat down in front of the monitor and loaded the med bay footage. The timestamp matched the days Jack had been talking about, right around the time they had moved him to a new cell and put the infected prisoner in his old one. The screen flickered to life, showing the sterile, dimly lit interior of the med bay. At first, the footage seemed ordinary. The prisoner lay on the bed, motionless, connected to machines that were monitoring his vitals. 2 guards stood nearby, occasionally glancing at him, but not paying much attention. It all looked normal, until the prisoner's body twitched. I leaned forward, watching closely. The prisoner shifted again, his arms jerking slightly, his head rolling to one side. At first, it looked like he was waking up, but something was wrong. His movements were erratic and unnatural. The guards noticed it too. They stepped closer to the bed, exchanging nervous glances. And then it began. The prisoner's body convulsed, his back arching off the bed as if something inside him was forcing its way out. His skin started to blister, bulging in grotesque patterns, as if something was crawling underneath. The guards rushed toward him, shouting for help, but it was too late. I watched in horror as the black veins spread beneath the prisoner's skin, creeping up from his hands, his arms, his neck, everywhere. His face twisted in pain, his mouth opening in a silent scream, but no sound came out. His eyes turned black, completely black, as if the darkness inside him had consumed everything. The guards panicked. One of them backed away while the other tried to restrain the prisoner, but the prisoner was no longer human. His body was contorted, his arms bending at impossible angles, his skin cracking open to reveal the black fungal growth underneath. It spread across his body like wildfire, taking over every inch of him. Then, with a terrifying burst of strength, the prisoner snapped free from his restraints and lunged at the guard closest to him. The camera shook as the scene descended into chaos. The other guard screamed, backing into the corner, as the prisoner, now a monstrous creature, ripped into his colleague, tearing him apart with inhuman strength. I paused the footage, my heart pounding. The image on the screen was frozen. The creature, mid-attack, its black eyes staring soullessly into the distance as it tore into the guard's chest. The room was a bloodbath, and the transformation was complete. Whatever that thing was, it was no longer the man they had brought into the med bay. I hit play again, watching as the creature dragged the lifeless guard's body across the room, tossing it aside like a rag doll. The other guard tried to escape, fumbling with the door, but the creature was faster. It leaped at him, bringing him down in an instant. Blood splattered across the camera lens, obscuring the footage for a moment, and then silence. The creature stood over the bodies, breathing heavily, its chest rising and falling in sharp, unnatural movements. Black fungus covered its skin, growing thicker and darker with each passing second. It lingered there, almost motionless, and then turned slowly toward the camera. I froze. Its black, hollow eyes were locked directly on the lens, as if it knew I was watching. I shut off the footage, leaning back in my chair, my breath ragged. Whatever had happened in that prison, it had started here, in the med bay. And now it was spreading. But they weren't the only ones haunted by the past. Somewhere else, something even more sinister was waiting. The Burnt Quartet will no longer perform. It is with great sorrow that I must announce the end of the Burnt Quartet. After the incident at our last jam session, we have decided to put all performances at the Rusalka to an end. We have also parted our ways as musicians, for good measure. I want to express my deepest gratitude to everyone who has been with us since 2017. Your constant positivity and words of kindness have made every show a pleasure. Even if you've only come once in a blue moon, thank you. You've kept us playing and helped us grow as musicians, as people even. If I could leave things at that. If I could just tell you that the Burnt Quartet broke up and tack on a warning to avoid the Hotel Rusalka at all costs, I would. I would, but there's the incident from the last show to contend with. I hate to sour this goodbye to the Burnt Quartet with a recollection of that horrible night, but it's been 3 weeks. I have already heard my fair share of rumors. Though I rather wouldn't, it's important I set the record straight. As most of you know, the Hotel Rusalka burnt down in the summer of 2015. Finding the lobby of the hotel well preserved and the city uninterested in doing anything with the building, me and the guys started performing our weekly concerts there. The doors beyond the lobby were locked, but it didn't matter. It was the entryway of the hotel that had the fantastic acoustics. Staying out of the rest of the hotel was an unspoken rule. Even when we found the keys a couple weeks in, we kept the doors to the rooms locked. The fire had destroyed much of the upper floors. Most of the Rusalka was a burnt husk. It was a reminder of a terrible tragedy. Our weekly concerts weren't about dissecting that disaster. The concerts were meant to be about something positive. On our last show, however, that cardinal rule of avoiding the upper floors was broken. So many lovely people stayed after the show, and it was starting to rain. There was no way we could all fit in the lobby. We probably should have all just called it a night, but I knew where the keys were. I also knew, from the floor plan in the lobby, that there was a large dining hall just behind the entryway. I take full responsibility for my decision. As much as it pains me, I also take full responsibility for the consequences of my decision. The floor plans were accurate. Not only was the dining hall big enough to fit everyone who stayed after the show, we also found a couple bottles of liquor, and with them the energy to perform again. Just as we were setting up to play, however, one of the members of the quartet, who I'd presume would like to remain nameless, ventured out into the stairwell with one of the audience members. Their tryst was short. It wasn't even 5 minutes after our colleague left that he returned. Both him and his female friend looked terrified. They had ventured out into the stairwell looking for privacy. What they found instead was a foreign voice. From the upper floors of the Rusalka, the floors that had been eaten up by that terrible fire nearly a decade ago, someone was groaning. The suggestion seemed insane. The doors to the stairwell had been locked ever since we started doing our weekly concerts. There was no conceivable way that someone could make their way upstairs without us noticing. The post-show gathering had turned into a party. The dining hall was filled with smiles and laughter and a steadily strengthening insistence that we play another round of songs. I was almost content with forgetting about the groaning and losing myself in the music. When I checked on the stairwell myself, however, I knew that I could not stand idly by. The groans weren't the sounds of the burnt hotel settling. They weren't the wind, and they certainly weren't any animal. Undeniably, the groans were the sounds of a man in crisis. Without any hesitation, me and the guys went upstairs to see if we could help. Not to put too fine of a point on our heroics, of course. Going up the charred steps of a building long condemned wasn't a calming task. The idea of leaving someone suffering upstairs while we played jazz, though, seemed absurd and disgusting. Even with everything that followed, even with the dissolution of the burnt quartet, I would not have acted any differently. The higher we rose through the hotel, the more apparent the fire damage had become. The groans were coming from the fourth floor. By the time we could hear the calls for help clearly, the walls around us were soot black. The closer we got to the source of the groans, the more they took shape. There was a sense of urgency to them. By the time we got out of the stairwell and entered the fourth floor, the groans broke into words. "I'll be late for work." A strained voice was calling from one of the rooms. "I need to go. I need to get up. I'll be late for work." Carpet had been simmered away to reveal the cement flooring. All the doors in the hall had been turned to ash. With the light fixtures long gone and the sun outside having set, we moved through the darkness with nothing but our phones to guide us. "The sirens have already went," the voice called. "The sirens have already went, and I haven't left the hotel. I'll be late. I'll be late, and I can't be late." Past the gaze of our flashlights, we saw movement. In one of the rooms, right by the doorway, lay a man pinned down by a chunk of debris. He was alive. He was alive, but he shouldn't have been. The moment we saw the man struggling under the chunk of wall, me and the guys descended to help him. It wasn't until we were squatted around him that we realized the extent of his injuries. "They've all left," he rasped, through lips eaten away by rot and flame. "They all left for the institute, and I'm still here. I need to go. I'll be late for work." The man was alive, but he shouldn't have been. All of his skin was charred beyond recognition. His limbs were worn away by starvation. The thought defied all reason, but the state of the man made it clear. Someone had survived the fire of 2015. Though the state of the man was beyond disturbing, he was obviously in need of help. As we cleared the debris, he thrashed and screamed and made our job no easier. I did not blame him for it. The man was clearly delirious. Instead, I ordered one of my colleagues who was holding the flashlight to immediately dial rescue services so that the burnt man could receive medical attention. The physical state of the trapped man defied all explanation. Once we got him freed of the debris, he defied reason once more. Though the man should have been dead, though he had been burned so thoroughly that any chance of survival was absurd, the moment the man was freed, he started to sprint. He ran through the dark hallway towards the stairwell with nothing but the bobbing beams of light from our phones to guide him. I am not much of a runner, so I was not able to keep up. One of my colleagues, however, was able to catch the burnt man just as he was about to enter the stairwell. When we first set off to investigate the strange groans, my colleague had taken a bottle of liquor with him from the dining hall. Much like me, he anticipated the strange sounds coming from upstairs to be of no danger. He didn't want to put an end to his merriment. Bringing that bottle with him nearly cost him his life. My colleague tried to restrain the burnt man, but he failed miserably. The trapped stranger was not only shockingly strong, he was also dangerous. When we caught up with my colleague, we found him lying on the floor of the stairwell. The burnt man would not be stopped. When my colleague tried to restrain him, he grabbed the bottle from his hand, broke it, and delivered a strike to the abdomen. Blood was pooling around my colleague's shirt, and medical attention was required. But the burnt man was still on the loose. Leaving the guys to deal with my injured colleague, I descended the stairs back towards the dining hall. The gathered audience had to be warned. Luckily, I was more adept at jumping down the stairs than the burnt man. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairwell, I was right behind him. I did not try to stop his mad sprint. Instead, I simply called out to everyone in the dining hall to not get in his way. Once people saw the broken bottle the burnt man was brandishing, no one had to be told twice. I followed the burnt man outside of the Rusalka, yet by the time we made it out of the hotel, he moved far too fast for me to match. Last I saw him, he was sprinting towards the industrial district. I pray that I will never see him again. The injuries from the broken bottle my colleague received weren't serious, but they were unexpected enough to make him swear off ever performing in the Rusalka again. The rest of the burnt quartet agreed unanimously. Our weekly tradition came to an end without argument. But why not just perform somewhere else? I hear you ask. Firstly, none of us are in the mood for music. After what we saw that night, we won't be in the mood for music for a long time. More importantly, though, it's the implications beyond that night that haunt us. The burnt man must have somehow survived the fire at the Rusalka. He must have survived and stayed trapped in his room for years and years and years. He survived and suffered, and every week he would listen to the burnt quartet play. Perhaps we will come back one day in a different location under a different name. Perhaps that terrible night, that terrible sight of the man nearly burnt to bone will leave our minds. Perhaps we will heal. But for now, we stay silent. For now, all we can say is, stay away from the burnt husk of the Hotel Rusalka. Their story came to a close, but somewhere in the shadows, another was just beginning.